Welcome, college basketball fans, to the Bracket U. We're calling it the Iowa Experience tonight because we're going to talk a lot about Iowa basketball, but we're also going to talk about Delphi Bracketology's seed list, what is currently going on, a little bit of the WOB, how we address those issues tonight. But Bracket U is brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. We're a high school club, 3 teachers, about 15 students that have been doing it for 12 years now, trying to guess what the NCAA committee is doing. And you can find our work at delphibracketology.com, where we put out seed lists and our latest bracket. We're updating that quite a bit now here in the last 2 weeks. You can find us on the X at Delphi Brackets. You could ask questions of us there. We will like to get back. Our job is to inform you of where your team is and what issues are facing your favorite teams as they enter NCAA tournament time and conference tournament time. Joining me tonight is my guy from Iowa fan. Has been a supporter of Delphi Brackets for many years. Got to meet him in person. John Altena has dabbled in some bracketology. He's an honorary member of our club for his gracious support of our students in sending us some money for dinners and so forth. But other than that, he's just an all-around good person. Former basketball player, knows what we're talking about. And John, welcome to the show.
Hey, I appreciate you having me back on. I don't think we got to do this last year, so really excited to be back. I was very pleasantly surprised and appreciate the gear that you're rocking tonight too.
Yeah, I had to support all you Iowa Hawkeye fans out there. I'm in an Indiana man cave, and I apologize. We haven't done a lot of these shows because I've been chasing the national championship around Pasadena and Atlanta, so I think I dropped the ball a little bit on these podcasts, but we're back in basketball business now, and this is the least I can do, John, to honor our distant friendship, but our friendship through basketball and your support of what we try to do here at Delphi Bracketology. And I wanted to have you on, and I wanted some Iowa fans to join us so we could just calm Hawkeye Nation down a little bit here. Bad loss this weekend, but it doesn't mean that you're out of the tournament. Give me just the state of Iowa basketball right now and what we need to do to help people understand that this team's going to be in the NCAA tournament short of a major, major miracle.
Yeah, we had a really good conversation, I think, before we jumped on. I think a lot of the frustration is just in the past, month, having 2 road losses that you probably shouldn't with what this team's capable of at Maryland, at Penn State. This one just felt like you can totally put it away, seal the deal. And I know you probably think they're already there and probably are too if you look at some of the analytics, but more of a frustrating experience. I think what everybody understands, and you talk about this a lot, is like it's the full picture. The committee's going to look at everything. We have been focusing a lot on WOB lately. And excuse me, there's one data point that I will say it's interesting. I don't even know if I would call it concerning yet at this point with so much basketball to be played. I think if you go through teams like 34 through 53, there's still 34 games left for those teams. And so, they'll lose some of those, they'll win some of those. The WOBs will still fluctuate quite a bit here. And then conference tournaments will be really interesting. I think you got into some good stuff when we were kind of chatting before of what bracketologists are looking at, because what Iowa fans do understand, whether it's in the Trilly Donovan Discord or on X, is all these bracketologists, consensus 8 or 9 seed, somewhere between 31 and 34 right now. That actually has seemed to get sorted out a little bit better over the past couple days, fluctuating a little bit less. And I think any Iowa fan is super excited to see them right now at 31 through 34. But I think, understanding that bigger picture will be a good conversation. Where they sit now, I think this is a really good first year for Ben McCollum. We had a lot of conversations about this before the year started too. A lot of excitement that we think both programs probably got their coach, even though in the coach search, we were wondering if they were going to end up at each other's school. But I think both of them are in a really good spot right now for the future of the programs. And from an Iowa perspective, we've talked about this too, fewer resources in Indiana, a lot less tradition. This was kind of the year one you had to have if you were going to pull back in some of that fan interest, the money now that it takes. So I think if you micro, the Iowa fan base feels really, really good about where they're at right now. Obviously, just a little bit frustrated that they put themselves a little bit in this position as it sits right now.
The best thing I can share for you and your Hawkeye fans is body of work, right? Body of work. All of the games count. The most recent games are fresh on our memory. But what we do here at Bracketology is we look at wins. You have 3 quad 1 wins. You have a nice win against Nebraska. You have opportunities, even though they seem tough on the road at Nebraska, against Michigan, who is just a juggernaut. At worst, you're 3-9 in that situation, and there are teams on our bubble, John, that are in. Ohio State and UCLA are 2 and 3 seeds at 2-10 and 3-8. Missouri has a net of 54, where Iowa has a net of 28. Like those teams, I don't think will ever pass Iowa, even if this week does not go as planned. Then on our last teams out, you have SMU 4-8, Santa Clara 1-5. Texas A&M 4-6 with 4 quad 2 losses. TCU 4-6, New Mexico 2-5, and we even have VCU hanging on to the last one with 0 quad 1 wins. So when I look at Iowa, they have a tough road, and it could be a seed drop. You want to try to make them as competitive to keep that net in the high 20s or low 30s. But let me throw this on. We had this for all you Hawkeye fans. If you can see this, you might want to increase the screen if you're watching. This is our comparison tool that was just created for us last week. We're going to tweak this a lot over the next few years. But what I've done is I've put the 8 teams, including 7 seed Miami, on this list. I left Utah State out because they're kind of difficult to seed. But if you really dive into this, the green represents good numbers. And that just flipped on me there. I'll try to get back to it. But anyway, in comparing those 8 teams, I told you that Iowa came in. Yeah, I'm going to have to reset that here. So I'll get that back off the screen. Gotcha. I apologize for that. But when I showed that to you before, Iowa really came in second with our weighted score, where we weight the net, the WOB, the T-rank, all of the metrics. And so when you have those 3 wins and you have the metric advantage over the other 6 teams, you're going to be in that 7-8 seed range. And I think even though you're going to, possibly, have a tough road here at the end, I think you're safe. In fact, I texted you to relax a little bit, just jokingly, because I know you're trying to be that person to help the Hawkeye fans go. But as you look at those 8 teams, I think we had Clemson in there. I'll go over our 7-8 seed line. Miami and Utah State at 27-28. Villanova, St. Louis 29-30. Iowa 31. Clemson 32. Georgia 33. UCF 34. Texas 35. And North Carolina State 36. And I don't want to take time to reset that. I apologize. I had that ready to go, and John can attest that he saw that. Iowa's second of all those teams. And so, again, that'll refresh after this week, and you may run into a little bit of difficulty, but I think Iowa's in a good spot.
I agree, and I think when you look at that, I do think what the fan base feels right now is that's probably the right spot for where they're at from the resume perspective. I think some of the questions and overreactions, with myself included, is what the WOB is going to actually do to this, which we'll get into a little bit. And I think if you do stack those teams up next to each other, that makes a lot of sense. I think the thing you said earlier too is, with 2 games left, 3 for some teams, maybe 4 for some of these teams, which I actually did a little bit of research here too, and there's some interesting stuff. That's just so many teams to fall below in such a short amount of time. When you're talking about 90% of the resume already being complete, and they're sitting in that spot, definitely you should feel good about. And their predictives could take a little bit of a dip if they get blown out against Michigan or Nebraska. But even that road loss to Penn State, where they're an 8 or 9 point favorite on Torvik and KenPom, moved them very little from a predictive standpoint. I think if you look at the resume metrics, maybe a little bit concerning in that 37-38 range. And then the WOB, that was the frustrating part, was them dropping to 36th overall, because like we talked about earlier, you want to stay in that top 40.
Yeah, and so hopefully I can show this again now, maybe if it pops up here. Yeah, I think it's showing now those 8 teams. And you can see, well, I have UCLA still in there, which skews that a little bit. But UCLA's in there too, and you beat UCLA. As you look at these teams that would have to pass Iowa, you're looking at Clemson and Georgia as the main teams you kind of want to root against. Miami of Florida. North Carolina State just got beat by 20-some tonight. That'll change their metrics. But Iowa has the best of these 8 teams that are on that 10, 11, 9, 8, 9, 10 seed line. Iowa has the best net ranking right now. You want to hold on to that. They're good in the WOB. They're good in Ken Palm. They're good in strength of record. So, you know, I think you're going to be okay. You're listening to the Bracket U. We're right now talking Iowa with John Altena. If you have any questions in the chat, throw them in. If you're watching live, we got a good audience thanks to our Iowa fans. About Iowa, we're going to talk Miami of Ohio. But, John, you've tweeted a lot on the WOB and what each game means. Could you enlighten our listeners on what that stat is and how it's calculated? Because I just look at the rankings. I don't even know how to do the math. And I've really appreciated following you with explaining how that adjusts from game to game.
And that's the thing is I don't think I've done a good job of, like, I've just been on this WOB train lately because, you know, looking back at last year's field, this is the first year that they used that tool and metric. And then David Warlock came out, 4 weeks ago, you know, working for the NCAA and said, I wish they would talk about this a lot more on TVs. And then you look at the top 16 bracket review and you see the importance of it. So I think it's going to be a very important data point, the way it kind of proved to be last year, if you just look at the seed list and how it ended up for the tournament. But essentially, you know, every game is worth 1 point. And so WOB has a value. It's called wins above bubble. And each game has a value on it. So if I was playing Michigan Thursday night, they're going to be a heavy underdog, probably 8, 9, 10 points, something like that. If they win that game, they get 0.87 WOB to their score out of a possible 1 point. If they lose that game because they're heavily not favored, they only lose 0.13. So those, you know, those games don't hurt you as much if you lose them. The part I love about it, I love predictives. Predictives are what are helping Iowa big time right now. But like North Carolina State gets blown out tonight. That might hurt their predictives a little bit. But from a WOB perspective, it didn't matter if they lost by 1 or by 55 tonight. Their WOB was going to go down a certain amount. And so if they would have won tonight, they actually would have picked up, looks like a .82. With a win over Duke, they would have been a lock because their WOB would have been over 2, not enough games to get below like a 1.3, which is a very safe zone for the NCAA tournament. And again, they're probably a lock anywhere close to, but because they lost that game, it went down 0.18, down to 1.10. So they're kind of hanging out in that 1 win above bubble range with, you know, 2 or 3 games left, depending on what they have in the NCAA tournament. And so every game gets a 1 point value. If you play a really bad team, your WOB's not going to go up very much. But if you play a really good team and you beat them, you're going to benefit from that. And I think that's the one thing that we've been talking a lot about, like understanding the predictives are solid for Iowa. The resume's fine. They got the road win at Indiana. They got the home win against Nebraska. And we've talked a lot about this. If they need it in their back pocket, you know, they have wins over USC, Indiana, UCLA. I'm forgetting one more there of kind of these, but Ohio
State, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 4-0 in that bucket, and that will help. Even if USC kind of falls out of the bubble here, it's something that the committee is going to look at when, as Graham Durham says, they go under the hood. And I think that will help Iowa. So all reasons for them to feel good. I think what's interesting, and again, there's only 1 year of data on this. If Iowa loses their next 2, so right now they're at a 1.67 WOB. If they lose their next 2, that will drop them to approximately a 1.33, which is still relatively safe. If they go to the Big Ten tournament, though, as the 9 seed and lose to Oregon or Maryland in that first game, that WOB loss will probably be worth about 0.65 to 0.7 if you look at other neutral WOB values earlier in the season. That would then drop Iowa to about a 0.63 to 0.68. Those are all approximate. And then, as we talked about earlier, and there's no way to know this yet because teams are going to win and lose, I would guesstimate that puts them at about 42nd in WOB. And I think that's the only thing that makes people a little bit nervous, because if you put them at 42nd in WOB and then you compare their resume to San Diego State last year, which I know is not fair to do year over year, but it's just an interesting nugget. the quad records are almost identical. The strength of schedule is almost identical. The wins are almost identical. The WOB is almost identical. And that San Diego State team was in Dayton. Now, we'll take Dayton. That doesn't bother me at all. Like, just figure out a way to get in. I think it's just a little bit closer than what you'd like to be when we're sitting here talking tonight about being on that 8-9 line with the opportunities ahead. But again, go win your dang games.
Yeah, win a game. And Felts, I love, if this is a Felts on X, I love following you. I usually don't follow fans until I trust that you really aren't just griping at Delphi bracketology.
Yeah.
But Felts, you're a solid follow. And I hope John just addressed your question there about if Iowa lost to Michigan and Nebraska and Oregon. But the thing is, John, too, is no team ranked 50 or below made the tournament. So 50 is the magic number. 40 and above were all 10 seeds or better.
Yeah.
Now, that's a trend, and trends are trends until trends are broken, right? But, this year I think there's a wide variety. So I'm not sure that goes down to 42 because it's going to be close because it's comparison, right? And even then, it's a ranking, right? So if other teams like North Carolina State loses 2 games and loses their first tournament, like that 0.67 or whatever number you calculated with 3 losses, including the Big Ten, might just put you at 39-40 compared to the other teams as things move around. And again, I think you have the win at Nebraska, the win on the road at Indiana, wins against tournament teams, that the teams that are in that 40 WOB, if that happens, I still think you would be in. You might be in Dayton. You might be an 11 seed. You might be a 10 seed. But I would just be shocked if not. I really appreciate the WOB conversation. But every game is won, and we are relying on it more. We have let me see if I can get to our spreadsheet here that we use at Delphi Bracketology, and it's color-coded, and I know it's kind of hard to explain. But here's our spreadsheet, and we have the WOB listed here next to the ranking. Duke is 2 in WOB at number 1 overall. And then we averaged out the WOB and the net. And as you can see this is not a criteria of the NCAA committee. This is just a place seeding for us to dig into the team sheets, right, to see who wins and not. So Iowa has a 32 average between the 28 net and the 36 WOB, and that squarely puts them with teams like Villanova, St. Louis, Iowa, and that 32 average, the last team in is 46.5 average. I just think it's too late to move those numbers to a situation, and we'll talk bubble teams here too. Like you got San Diego State, California, Virginia Tech, Auburn, Indiana, all with just really weak schedules or weak resumes that I think would have to win out, and I don't know. So, hey, we appreciate the comments coming in on the chat room. Felts, we got your question there. I do think that the other question that came in is Ben Schuff, you said on the flip side, if Iowa were to somehow find its way to Saturday in the Big Ten, yeah, that's the upside. I think the ceiling is a 7. Most likely 8 or 9, depending on what other teams. Where do you think, as we wrap up our Iowa discussion and move on to some general bracket questions, where do you think the ceiling and the floor is for Iowa?
I think you're probably spot on. The question I was going to ask you, which is interesting,
Sure.
just because of this emphasis on WOB, is the rumor or I guess my question is, where do you sit on when the committee really does cut off their selection of teams? And it's interesting to me because I've heard Thursday evening, Friday morning, and with how this works, I mean, some of these teams could collect anywhere from like 0.8 to 1.4 WOB, which could spike them into like from 44 up to 36. Like, is it more just seeding at that point? What time do you think they're done?
I believe they're done Friday morning, Friday afternoon with putting teams in the field, short of the last 4. I think maybe Saturday morning, Saturday night, they're down to the last four teams, and it's by vote, which us, the bracketologists here, we move it on a spreadsheet. As you see, I can sort that by anything that I want to sort and move teams up and down. But the committee votes. And I think the first vote is 37 teams. You can vote up to 37 teams that you want in as a committee member, and then there's a certain rule. If you have 9 out of 12 on a list, you're on the consideration board. A lot of details there that we can't get into on a show. But I think sometimes when they're voted in matters too. So what does the committee think of Iowa? Like, they think Iowa's good enough to be voted in, and they're voted in the top 28. They're already going to be a top 7 seed, and the only reason they move down is in that head-to-head scrubbing that happens, right? So, again, I think Iowa, if I were in the committee room, I would probably vote Iowa in, like I said, the 7, 8, 9 seed line, and then move up and down based on head-to-head. So that's, to answer your question, that's what we found. What we do at Bracketology is we set our stuff on Monday, a week from Monday, and then we have like contingency plans, and we do very little movement based on the conference tournaments because they're already starting to vote on Tuesday, on Wednesday. The major tournaments really get going on that Thursday. They have seed line 6 or 7 selected, and maybe the top 3 or 4 seed lines seeded by the time Thursday evening, Friday afternoon comes around. Can there be changes? Yeah, but I don't know that there's a whole lot of changes going on. So,
and what's interesting, I nerded out a little bit on this today too. And again, not to put too much emphasis when these teams do play these games, because it's one of 31 or 32 at that point. But another thing that helps Iowa, I guess, or any bubble team who has some aspirations is, and it won't go chalk this week, but if it did, like UCLA, Iowa, Georgia, Indiana, Ohio State, California, SDSU, SMU, New Mexico would all have games versus each other in their respective conference tournament in one of the first 2 games. So like just by default, half of those win, half of those lose, which is going to create separation on some of those metrics that are a little bit more volatile. I did want to mention this too. The one thing I left out that I think is pretty dang important when discussing like an Iowa versus a San Diego State last year too. San Diego State's net was 54. Iowa's is 28, right? That's a significant difference. I like worst case scenario, I don't know that Iowa can drop more than, what do you think, 6 to 8 more spots in the net if they get blown out in 2 games and lose. Like those things are pretty solid at this point.
Yeah, they're pretty well set, and you know, it's always been the result metrics, or the WOB gets you voted in, and then they're going to go look at how well you've played, and that's your offensive metrics, your KenPom, those things, and that's what favors the teams in the Big Ten right now that are on the bubble. They're very, very heavy in metrics. Some of them have better wins than others, more wins than others. But if you're 45, we put 46 on our spreadsheet. That is 22 AQs, 68 through 47, and then we think there are 9 conferences that generally are in the top 46 or will place their guys in the top 46, so that's 9 more automatic qualifiers and 37, but we really try to focus on 1 through 46, so when we're looking at the WOB, if you're 46 or better, you're heavy into consideration. If you're 47, 48, 49, you have a shot, and there will be a time when a WOB of 50, 51, 52 makes it, because a trend is a trend until it's broken. But if you're 45 or above and have some nice wins and have some decent metrics, I think you're going to be in the tournament, and then the metrics might move you up, right? When you compare a 28 net to a 54, like if you look right now, there's more wins for Missouri than Iowa, but Missouri's net is 54. I have a hard time thinking those wins will overcome those predictives in that wide of a margin. But that, you know, we don't know, because like you and I are in the committee room, you may vote Iowa an 8, I may vote Iowa as a 9, and then who do we convince, or what discussion was there, and then do we have 7 on your side or 7 on my side? There's a voting thing there, and it could make sense. You know, right now we're talking to the 5 and 6 seed line, John. We have Tennessee and St. John's, and each one could be the 5 seed, last 5 seed. So it depends on, you know, if 7 people agree with me on Tennessee, or do 7 agree with the freshman kid that emailed me today when he's supposed to be doing his math, telling me that he believes Tennessee should be up, right? That's the part I love about this. The teachers do a lot of the legwork, but then the kids are sending me text and emails and busting in my room during lunch to, you know, tell me Baker Mazara is off the team, and so that's the fun part of the group aspect of what we do. So let me end with Iowa people, relax a little bit. I think you got a really good coach. Enjoy your point guard. I think that's a key in winning games, even games that you shouldn't. The Sturts kid is amazing. Enjoy him while you have him. Indiana's not going to make the tournament. You know, they would have to win 4 in a row and maybe upset that next team in the Big Ten tournament to get enough. They just don't have enough wins, and they're sitting at 50 in the WAB. So I'm going to put my hopes in other Big Ten schools, and I have a lot of appreciation for what Coach McCullum and that team's doing. They need to get more athletic, I think, from a coach's perspective, and from an outside observer, I think they need to get a little more athletic. That's the same with Indiana. Yeah, you had 2 guys who are really mid-major guys, and they've done some winning with some of those guys, but I think they got to try to get in the portal and get some guys to be a little different in order to get in the top half of the Big Ten consistently. But I think it's good stuff. But John, I want to come to you about Miami of Ohio.
Yeah,
they have 2 games left. They're 26-0. They'll max out at 28-0 because they had 3 games against teams that don't count on the schedule. Very weak schedule, but are going undefeated. What do they have to do in your mind to get an at-large from a fan perspective, and what do you think they have to do to get an at-large from a bracketologist perspective?
from a fan perspective, I would hope they could take a loss. I follow Buzz King on Twitter, another guy who loves bracketology. He's a Gopher fan, St. Thomas fan. He put out a tweet today that I kind of liked. He's like, I kind of want to see him lose a game or two to make the committee show us what they're all about. Now, I think if you're a Miami of Ohio fan or a college basketball fan, I understand the other side of that where it's like you don't want to risk it, right? Like, I'll say this, though. Do they deserve to be in? In my opinion, undefeated, absolutely. Even with one loss, again, not to just direct it back to this, and I'll get over it real quick. Their WAB would still be pretty dang good. Probably about a 1.3, 1.4 with one loss. That stacks up well. I get the scheduling component. Like, they have a strength of schedule of 346. Their non-con schedule might be the actual worst. I think at 364. And what are there, 365 total?
Yeah.
I think there's that conversation of what can they do, what can't they do. And not to ride the line on this, like, they're not playing great basketballs of late. Like, they beat Western Michigan by 2 over the weekend. Iowa beat Western Michigan by 40, literally 40 points. Like, and you can't do that all day either. So I'm not worried about that as much. As a fan, I would like to see them in as long as they have 0 or 1 losses. From a committee standpoint, obviously, if they win their conference tournament, like, that's probably what the committee would like to happen, unless if they really enjoy those types of scenarios and experiences. I just think that I think 2, they're for sure out. If they have 1 loss from a committee perspective, it'll be interesting again to see where a lot of these bubble teams end up on some of their metrics. It's like, the only metric I'm concerned about as an Iowa fan is WAB, but the only metric Miami of Ohio has going for them is WAB, because they are 1-0 in quads 1 and 2, which is just unbelievable. I think 2 losses, they're out. I think 1 loss from a committee standpoint, you're probably at 50-50, but you can't have any other bid stealers. Otherwise, I think that's an easy excuse for the committee to say, like, hey, that will be the St. Louis, right? They'll put them at 69 or 70 on that seed list and say, like, yeah, we had them in, but this team passed them. Like, that's the easy excuse. So 2, they're out. 1, 50-50, and 0, obviously, they're going to the dance. Now, seeding, that's interesting.
That is interesting, and I'll try to answer that. I'm with you on that. If they go undefeated in the regular season and get beat in the championship game to Akron, who's very good as well from that league, I think the committee will put them in. Where do they put them in? Do they send them to Dayton, or do they give them an 11 seed that's not in Dayton? And here's where your question about when teams are selected, right? If the committee really likes Miami of Ohio, they will be in before they vote on the last 4 teams.
Good point.
And they're in. And then what happens when they're in, if they win the conference tournament, now they got to vote another team in. So let's say Miami was the 37th at large, right? Or let's say they're 33rd. And then they win the tournament. Now there's only 32 at larges. They vote someone else in, right, at that point. So if the committee really feels good about them and votes them in the top 32, top 35, I think they're going to be in even if they get beat. The seeding and the scrubbing at that point, like if you're the 3rd team from the bottom, do they scrub you up to do that? And then how much do they just depend on their their criteria. And what I found is at the back end, the criteria is jumbled. At the top 4 or 5 seeds, it is wins, it is strength, not strength of schedule as much, but the WOB, the net, all of those metrics. It's pretty easy to seed 1 through 6 for the most part. Not saying what we do is easy. Yeah. But all of a sudden, when you pick those last 4 or 5 teams, one team has 5 wins. You say, they've won against good competition. Oh, North Carolina last year had a net of 39, and their conference was weak. So then you vote them in. It comes down to a one-on-one voting on this team getting in, this team getting in. And I think sometimes different criteria, and that's what makes bracketology so fun, because you just don't know what those 12 people in the room are really thinking. But I think they're 11 seed even if they get in with their numbers. We have them as a 10 seed right now. I think that's the ceiling for Miami. All right, I'm going to ask you a couple other questions, and if you have questions for me, and we'll go as long as you want to talk a little bit tonight. Here's our top 4 seeds for anyone who is interested in that. It's pretty simple at the top: Duke, Michigan, Arizona. I think there's a discussion to be had between Connecticut and Florida, and I'll ask you just real quick, Connecticut or Florida, who do you think right now, and who do you think ends up maybe being that last number 1?
I think it's UConn right now. I think it's going to end up being Florida. I don't know that they're going to take another loss. This is a little bit interesting because the committee says, the full body of work. But, I don't know if there's anybody outside of UConn fans anywhere in the country that wouldn't say, Florida actually makes sense as a 1 seed, even if maybe the numbers say they should be on the 2 line. Because that's crazy. If you're a 7 seed, you'd probably rather play UConn than Florida if those were your 2 options. Not that either one of them are a ton of fun. I do think that if UConn drops 1 more, that opens the gate for Florida. I do think Florida's going to end up there. They're just, and I know the committee doesn't go into last 10 or anything like that, but it's just been so overwhelming. A little bit of Michigan earlier in the year, that's going to be hard for me to see them not putting them on the 1 line. But I do think if UConn wins out and Florida wins out, it could be interesting.
Yeah, and UConn beat Florida earlier in the season, and sometimes that when you go head-to-head, head-to-head is not an official criteria, but when they scrub one team versus the other, if it's really tight, and the thing is, those 2 teams are going to meet up.
Right.
It's going to be in the South region at Houston. Yeah. If Florida's the 1, UConn's going to be the 2, and probably vice versa on that is very, very likely. So our rest of our 2s, this is interesting because you had Houston that had lost 3 in a row. You had Illinois has lost 2 in a row. Iowa State went 1-2 since the reveal. Purdue has lost 2 in a row. How much does that move this late in the season? It's always a debate. What you get a lot of is we have to act like we know what we're doing in bracketology. So, hey, this moves this team and this moves this team. But it's that body of work. So how much did these teams drop? But the interesting thing, John, is Florida's gone 3-0. Michigan State's won 2 games on the road at Purdue and at Indiana, which were quad 1 wins on the road. Nebraska is 25-4 and has won. Alabama is pushing with 3-0. Texas Tech is 3-0. And so what happens is when you start comparing 3-0 versus 0-3, you will see some movement on the 2, 3, and 4 line. And really, our job should be set right now. It should be easy on that 2, 3, 4 seed line. But, man, there's a lot of teams that I think the next week and a half might make a difference.
And that's a good point because, again, I was listening to the Unnamed Bracketology podcast last night with Kerry Miller and Graham Dorn, and they said, this is usually set in stone. When you look at the reveal to what it ends up being, it's usually very similar. And the reveal is typically earlier in the year. So the fact that it was just a week ago, would make you think that it's even more set now. But when you are talking 3-0 versus 0-3, this could be the year that kind of turns that narrative a little bit.
So those are our top 3 seed lines. We have Texas Tech still on the 4. They're pushing for a 3. I still think we got to wait a little bit to see how they handle JT Toppin. They've done it well. They've gone into Iowa State and won. Is that enough to move them up to a 3? We'll see. Kansas has lost a couple games. Gonzaga loses to St. Mary's. Virginia gets blown out at Duke. Those are our 4 seeds. And then, from there, the interesting things, what to do with the Wisconsin, who has some of the best wins on the road, but then they go and lose to Oregon. You have St. Mary's, who only has one quad one win. How do you place them when they're around teams with 6, 7 quad one wins? But their metrics and their WOB are out of this world. The average between those two is 22, which puts them on the 6th seed line. John, I'll ask you this. Utah State, St. Louis, really good teams in their conference. Not really strong schedules outside of their conference. 25-3 for St. Louis, 23-5 for Utah. They both have, Utah has 3 quad ones and St. Louis has 2. The metrics boost them up 24, 25 net. How do you seed them, and where do you think it's fair for those smaller conferences, non-power 5 conferences, champions or leaders to be seeded?
Yeah, and again, you don't want to look back like too often to say like, yeah, see, this is how your conference represented in the past. I will say this, like for those 2 teams, like things that stick out to me, regardless of some of the level of talent, because I know they're much heavier on the quad 3, quad 4 side. St. Louis has 19 quad 3, quad 4 games. Utah State, quick math here, has 14. Strength of schedules, both of them above 90. St. Louis significantly higher than that. And then decent WOBs. What I would say is they do have a lot of wins away from home. Both have 7 true road games, and I don't have the neutral numbers in front of me. I think that's always something that you can do to kind of make up for that. But I will say, from a seeding perspective, you put either one of those like on the 6th line. Let's say they win out, right? And other things crumble. They end up somewhere in that 6 range. Like that's an 11 seed Power 5 team's dream. Like if that's Iowa, I actually would have loved to play St. Louis and Des Moines earlier this year. That got canceled. But like that's a first round game you're okay with, knowing you could have a potential 3 seed come in. I think they're probably likely to be in that purgatory range of 7, 8, 9, kind of depending on where it all falls. Just when you do look at all those metrics.
That's and not discrediting what Utah State and St. Louis, but would you rather play St. John's or St. Louis if they're all both on the 6th seed line? I mean,
100%.
you'd rather take.
Yep,
I think that's just common. Hey, you're listening to Bracket U, a show from Delphi Bracketology about brackets. Follow us at DelphiBracketology.com or on the X at Delphi Brackets. If you're here live, and we thank all of you for joining us live, drop something in the chat. I might have missed this a little bit. Think said, how close is Iowa even to the bubble? I think we've kind of answered that. I hope we did. If not, we'll try to address that on the X. Okay, John, you're in the committee room. You and I are in the committee room. I think you and I could do a really good job of selecting the teams, and you'd have to leave the room talking about Iowa. I'd have to leave the room talking about Indiana, of course, but we're down to the bubble now. Yep. What criteria would be the most important for you as you've done this bracketology stuff and you've played basketball? How do we get the best teams in? And what would your vote be like, and what would you want to see to vote for teams to get in that last 4 spot?
This is going to be a little bit of a cop-out because I think my answer is actually going both ways here, because what I think I do value is the grind of these Power 5 schedules. I do think is tougher in general. But I do think that it's easier to stomach losses from a committee standpoint too. Like we're talking about a St. Louis who's at 25-3. If they're at 23-5, they're probably on the bubble. That is tough. Whereas these Power 5 teams, you can lose 11, 12, even 13 games. And we're still talking about them, kind of being very much in the mix. Outside of Auburn, like I think for me, that's the one that drives me nuts. I actually do still feel like there's got to be value in winning games, even though that can kind of argue against, my team this year. Like they've won plenty of games, don't get me wrong, but to win 20, 21, 22 games in a Power 5 league is not easy to do. I think it's when you get up to 14, 15, 16 losses. I just think you've had your opportunities. I really don't care how tough your strength of schedule is. Like if you're losing those games too, some of them by 30 points, like that's not great. And so where you look at the cutoff here and you say, what criteria are you looking at? I think it, like, I know people say like you can manipulate the net based off your predictives. I almost disagree with that in a sense, because even to manipulate the predictives, you still have to blow out those teams. And if everybody could beat those teams by 50, they would, but they're not. And so I guess what I'm getting at, like, long story short, I really do, and I know they don't. I wish they did select teams more a little bit based off these net rankings. I do think Indiana State a couple years ago should have gotten in. And so I guess I would go kind of that net first. I really do see the value in WAB. But then again, like, total number of losses has to have not a cap that you can put it on, but has to be reasonable as well. I just don't think Auburn is reasonable. I would much rather see several teams who are on that line before them. But here's what's fun to me this year on the bubble. It's a mix of a little bit of West Coast Conference, a little bit of Mountain West, and then a little bit of Power Five. I'm interested to see how that is going to end up and split out. And then you said this earlier, and I'm not saying you're wrong. You wiped Indiana off the table, saying like they need to win 4 in a row. I just like I would also say pause there as well. Like, again, I don't see a game in their next 4 that they couldn't win. And I know that's tough to string them all together too, but versus Minnesota, at Ohio State, probably Northwestern, first round of the Big Ten tournament, and then either UCLA or Ohio State, that's not impossible either. And so, yeah, I think all these teams are still there. I think even though we're coming down to the last few games, there could be some interesting late movement. But I hope it's a mix. I hope the last 4 in. I really hope Dayton is 2 Power 5 teams and 2 more mid-majorist West Coast teams.
Yeah, I agree with you. And hey, this was supposed to be a help Iowa fans calm down, not a help Indiana fans calm down podcast. We might have to have you back, but you are correct there with Indiana. No one's really off the bubble until Selection Sunday, and you can win games. But I think Indiana needs help. They would need some teams that are in now to really play their way out, combined with Indiana having a good run, and that's not a good place. That's not a good place to be. They're not off our sheet, consideration sheet by any means. But let's take a look at who we have on the bubble. And every day I want to change it a little bit. We have our last 6 teams on the 11 seed line: SMU, Santa Clara, and then our last 4 in: Texas A&M, TCU, New Mexico, and VCU with no quad wins. They have 2 wins in quad 3 that are right on that cutoff line. That Virginia Tech is 52, and I think they play Dayton coming up. That's 71 on the road if they win that. But their metrics, their WAB's 46, and as of yesterday, and their predictives or their net is 47. I am like you. I like the net, and I know the net gets a lot of it's just a sorting tool. But it's how you play. It's offense and defensive efficiency against your opponents that you're playing. And I know that when there's no cap on the score, that gets argued and so forth. But I think it's been pretty reflective of teams and teams being pretty good. And I think the committee's done a good job, John, of the outliers. There's been some 50s in the 6, 7, 8 seed range. Memphis last year, I think, was a 50, and they took some other considerations into giving them, I think, a 6 seed last year. So the committee does a good job in that, that it's not just this top 46 get in, and we don't want a true scoreboard on
Correct.
that. So if SMU, Santa Clara, Texas A&M, TCU, New Mexico, VCU, I would say VCU is the obvious one that's kind of very questionable to even have in. But who else on there do you think has a difficult time of staying in the next 2 weeks in the bubble? A&M, TCU, New Mexico, or VCU?
I think TCU is going to be fascinating, but here's where I don't like the team, but what I appreciate is they have really good wins. But their schedule, if you look at it here, at Texas Tech versus Cincy, who's playing a little bit better, they're probably going to get West Virginia, who's outside bubble right now. If they in the Big 12 tournament, if they win that, then they get Arizona. That's probably not a lot of wins, and they're sitting there right on the cusp. I like that. To me, is going to be a very entertaining one. SMU as well. They're dropping down that seed list pretty quick. They got to play Miami, who's playing great basketball, Florida State, who's significantly better, and then they're looking at a first-round ACC game against California, who's also on the outside of that bubble. I think those are the 2 teams that I'm very interested to watch down the stretch here. I feel really good about Texas A&M. Again, I hope Auburn loses so that we can stop talking about it. VCU is an interesting one because I think they've had, and I forgot this metric earlier. I love this one is wins versus the field, not like oh, you beat a 16 seed early in November. I mean like versus that at large team. Or sorry, that at-large pool. I think that's important because I believe VCU's had 6 shots at teams in the field and they're 0-6. Like,
Right.
to me, that's tough. That's indicative of like, what do you do now? If it's a soft bubble, somebody's got to be there. But it's not like they haven't had their chances and they haven't taken advantage of any of them.
Yeah, and so you get into this where VCU's beat Virginia Tech, which is our third team out. Then do you get to that kind of minutia when you're voting in, right? San Diego State has a WAB of 52, California 51. Right now, we're having 50 as the cutoff. And again, until a team like San Diego State, California have massive reasons why to be put in with a WAB over 50, we're going to probably keep them out. And if we're wrong, we're wrong. But California has the 331st non-conference schedule.
Yeah.
They have they're 2-4 in quad 2, 5-1. Do they have a couple nice wins? Yes, but at 51 and 64 net, I don't see them going in. And you go back to your Indiana comment, that's where Indiana can sneak back in. If VCU loses to Dayton, they don't get that quad 1, they lose in the semifinals. New Mexico gets upset. TCU loses 3 games in a row. SMU loses 3 games in a row, and Indiana wins a few. That's the only way I think that those types of schools will flip in. But San Diego State, California, Virginia Tech, Auburn, Indiana, who's moving in your opinion?
Another good one. I really don't think it's going to be Auburn because I think if they lose to Alabama and then lose one in the SEC tournament, they're going to be in trouble. I think you said it earlier, again, not as a cop-out. I think it is tough for this group to move in. If you look at Virginia Tech, I think they have an opportunity just because where they're at in proximity. But again, like if you look at the WAB of those teams, like it's going to be a tough climb for any of them. I think what's interesting is usually when I think about like the bubble out heading into championship week, it's, first 4 out, next 4 out. I think it's a tough draw right now past 4 or 5 teams. Again, this is not homerism. I'm very interested to see what Indiana can do here, just because in my opinion, that's a pretty manageable schedule. They need to rack up wins right now. They need to rack up WAB. And if those are their 4 teams, I would love that schedule. If you needed to make moves, you either need to beat somebody really good or you can rack up wins against, some of these things. But at Ohio State's probably going to give them a 0.6 WAB. Playing Ohio State in the Big Ten tournament a couple days later would give them another 0.6 WAB. Like, it's tough to win for it on the stretch, especially if you're not playing good enough. But if you look at these schedules and what teams have left, I think they're in a decent spot. Also, I want to just quick touch on like the head-to-heads that I think get really fun here. Another result that's very interesting to me, not that you can just look at in a vacuum, New Mexico beating Santa Clara by 27 earlier this year. Like that could be a big conversation next week.
Yeah, and we have Santa Clara based just on a 40 net and a 41 WAB. They could be out. They had lost their chance hosting, I think, St. Mary's, or maybe they played at St. Mary's. They have that one win that covers them. So, any of those 2 teams that we have on the 6th seed line, I think, and here's the crazy thing, Ohio State gets a quad 1 because Northwestern upsets Indiana and moves into the quad 1 category. Then they beat Purdue yesterday. We got them all the way up to 37. That's the razor-thin margins of these last 9 teams are so weak that one loss can drop you 3 or 4. One win can move you up 3 and 4, and we normally don't operate that way.
No.
But 2-10 and 6-1 and no losses in outside of quad 2, and then their WAB is 37, which puts them in the tournament. Then their net is 34, which is a 9 seed. Yeah. And you downgrade them a little bit for being 2-10. You downgrade them from that spot to a 10. UCLA's 3-8, right below them with a 38 WAB and a 39 net. Those teams really could be in the last 4. So those last 9, and now you add North Carolina State, who's now 4-7 and 7-3 with a quad 4 loss. That's the last 9 seed. So all of those teams probably need to to make sure they're good and safe. And again, that goes back to our initial talk today about Iowa. All those teams would have to win 4 games, and Iowa would have to lose in order for them to fall out of the tournament. Seeding, I can't guarantee you guys seeding, right?
I think there's a good chance. Yeah, you got have this conversation in 2 weeks, and Iowa fans are going to be elated because they fell to a 10 or 11 seed, which you'd much rather have than an 8 or 9, right? It's just in the moment. It's a little bit more tense.
Well, Think's in there, and he had a question. I think we just answered. Is NC State on the bubble? They're far from it, but they're in danger. But they're 5th in the ACC. Again, I think they're kind of in the Iowa boat too, where the losses don't look good right now, but they've done enough work early that the body of work is safe. We appreciate you're thinking, hey, we've been going now about 50 minutes. I got a couple other questions. I love your basketball mind. I love your passion for your school. I think we're kind of lost brothers from another mother or something, because we both are the same way. But tournament expansion, when you look at this bubble, it says no. Your thoughts on tournament expansion is this? And for me, there's a caveat about getting some mid majors in. The only way I would accept it is if you put a team like Belmont in if they get beat. Make sure that Miami gets in, even if they lose a couple games, and maybe have some spots where the committee says these are the top 4 mid-majors, they're in, and then go seed them. I don't know if that's right either, but your thoughts on expansion?
I'm anti-expansion overall, and I hear all the arguments about, the bubble's so soft. Imagine having this conversation with the first 12 out. I will say this: I'm glad they announced that the play-ins will be all the last 12 teams in. I'm glad it's not incorporating those 16 seeds anymore. It could be a fun event on Tuesday, Wednesday to have these 12 teams playing their way into the field. But to your point, there is a fun way to do this where I get that the dollars don't go to the conferences and all that crap, but how fun would it be if it really was your last 8 teams in and then your top 4 mid-majors, or even split 6 and 6? Because to your point, a South Florida team at 20-8, a Tulsa at 21-6, a Belmont at 25-5, to your McNeese at 23-5. I think there's incredible entertainment value there for this whole David and Goliath thing. And I'll say this: if this is going to happen where we don't see as many Cinderellas in the actual tournament, just because you're seeing the top kind of separate away with NIL and not being able to build rosters for 4 years for these little guys, the one way to get some of that back is to let these teams in your playing games. And so I think it could be entertaining if they did it right. I don't have a lot of faith that they will get it right. But then if you use Haslam metrics too to say, those teams don't belong, I did a little study on that too and posted it a couple months ago. That's not true. If you put a McNeese up against a TCU, he has those hypothetical spreads on a neutral floor. A lot of those games are 2, 3, 4 point favorites. To me, that would be very entertaining. I don't think you can make the case that, TCU would blow the doors off them. I don't think that's the case. So I think you could make a very entertaining first 12, incorporating some of those little mid-majors.
Yeah, I'm anti-expansion too. I'm gonna reseed a 76 team bracket. I did that a couple years ago. Now I did combine the 16s and 15s, and the only rationale I have is that those teams usually get beat.
Yeah.
And if you combine them, half of those teams will experience winning and advancing, right? I know half of them are going to lose on that Tuesday night, but so there is something about that. You are a winner in an NCAA tournament game. Yes, it's played on Tuesday or Wednesday in some location, and then you got to go play a team like that. And I'll try to repost that for anyone at Delphi Bracketology. There were some interesting matchups in that year. I will see what the interesting matchups would be this year. But I like it the way it is. I just wonder if I'm an old man, get off my lawn at this stage of my life, not wanting to see change, right? And then you look at the teams that we're discussing out, and they really don't have good resumes. And how far are you going to go down if you don't include some room for, major upsets in the smaller conferences with teams who have played really well and deserve a chance to go play and then just get beat in a 3-game tournament where upsets can happen because of the 3-game scenario. So, well, John, I've taken about an hour of your time. I could take about another 2 hours. I appreciate it, but let's end on this. I know you're all fired up and you're going to stress out about Iowa, and then when Selection Sunday is going to come, I'm going to text you and we'll see. I told you. I think and I hope that the Iowa fans who have joined us have appreciated our conversation. But what do you? It's March. What does March mean to you? I know you go to the Big Ten tournament a lot. I'm not going to be there this year, but you're a huge basketball fan. How do you handle March, and why is it so awesome?
I'm obnoxious about it. Like, I think a lot of people probably get over the shtick a little bit, or they think it's doing it for the clicks or the likes. But ever since I was a kid, like March Madness was the thing I enjoy the most. I think that's pretty evident about this is people have their hobbies, right? Like this is my college basketball is my hobby. Probably drives my wife a little bit nuts, but to me, this is the fun part. And I say this too, for me, it all started last weekend where you're just starting some of these conference tournaments for the little guys. The big guys have, these critical last 2 games, and then you jump into championship week, which is a blast. You go to I love going to the Big Ten tournament or any conference tournament just for the fact that you get all those fan bases together. I think Chicago's a really cool spot because you can buy the cheap tickets, watch the Big Ten game. If it's entertaining or if it's bubble teams, if it's not, they got the huge sports book in Chicago now inside the arena there with 80 TVs and a bar. You go watch all these other bubble games. It's a one-stop shop that is just so much fun. And it's kind of like the build up to a vacation is sometimes more fun than the actual vacation. I think championship week, jostling for position, getting a bid. And then obviously that Thursday through Sunday, the first week is just amazing. I think for me, it's all that fun.
Well, I tell you what, we appreciate you being on tonight. We appreciate you following Delphi Bracketology. We really appreciate your support, and it's been good that we got to meet last year. That was a highlight, and I'm retiring from teaching at the end of the year, but I'm going to stay with Delphi Bracketology. I'm going to stay with Delphi Bracketology, and I'm going to look to expand, have a lot more time to build up the website and podcast, and we'd really like to extend an invitation for you to be somewhat of a regular contributor, even earlier than March, but in November, and do some check-ins every once in a while. And we'll be with you, at the back end of football season next year about that. But Iowa, I'm going to be rooting for you and your Hawkeyes to be successful. I want the Big Ten to be successful, and it's been a pleasure talking basketball with you. So we appreciate it.
Yes, no, thank you for the time. Always good to chat. Thanks, Brian.
Yep, you're listening to Bracket U, or you have been listening to Bracket U, a bracket podcast brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. I'm Brian Tonsoni, the sponsor. You can follow our work at DelphiBracketology.com and get a hold of us on Twitter at Delphi Brackets. Best of luck to your team in championship week. If you're a smaller school, get those big wins if you're a big school and head into your championship team, and may you be seated where you want to. It's March, and it's basketball. Thanks for listening.